Police are called to a highway in England, not for a crash and not for a crime. Two women are walking on the central median of the M6 highway, a narrow strip of concrete between lanes of traffic moving at full speed. Cars are flying past them. Drivers are swerving, honking, slamming on their brakes, and the women? They're calm, but something isn't right. They're clutching their bags, staying close together, watching everyone around them like there's a threat that no one else can see. Police approach, trying to guide them to safety. For a moment, it looks like they might cooperate, but then, without warning, one of the women suddenly breaks away and runs straight into traffic. She's immediately hit by a truck and disappears underneath its wheels. Before anyone can even react, the second woman does the same exact thing. She runs into another lane and is struck by a car. They should be dead, but they're not. They're conscious, moving, and instead of asking for help, they start fighting it, kicking at paramedics, screaming. One insists people are trying to steal her organs. The other is convinced no one around her is real. Two women, same fear, same reality, and no clear explanation. What could make two people break from reality at the exact same moment, in the exact same way? Tonight, we're talking about Folie à deux, shared madness. Dun dun. Strangers, welcome to our very first episode of Strange Mind. I'm Dr. Amy Busing. I'm a clinical psychologist who's been practicing for over 20 years. I've always been drawn to peculiar psychological phenomenon, and I'm here with my co-host,
Viking Cat Lady,
or Liz.
Peanut Gallery.
She has agreed for some odd reason to follow me into these rabbit holes. So with Strange Mind, we're going to be talking about real people, real cases, real disorders. And today we're going to ask, how does a mind break and what happens when it doesn't break alone? That's called Folie à deux. Or as some say, Folie à deux. Really.
Which is incorrect.
It's incorrect. Or shared psychosis. And this story starts in France in 1933 with two sisters, and it escalated in a way that no one saw coming. So let's go back to France, early 1900s. We have this absolute dumpster fire of a family called the Papins. Clemence is the mom, Gustave is the husband, and then there's three sisters. There's Amelia, Christine, and Leah. And Christine and Leah are who we're really going to focus on for this story. So before we even get to the crime, we need to understand that this started in a family that was pretty broken. Amelia is the first daughter. And then once Christine and Leah come along years later, they're put in the homes of family members because the mother, Clemence, is deemed to be unfit and unnurturing. So later it comes out that Gustave has raped the oldest daughter at 10. And rather than believing and supporting her daughter, Clemence decides that clearly she had seduced her father.
That's usually how that goes.
At age 10.
At age 10.
So they put her in a strict Catholic boarding institution. And the mother decides, well, let me pull Christine out of her stable environment with relatives. Let me put her there too. And then when Leah's uncle dies, she ends up there. So it's a happy family reunion.
Yeah. Reunited at the Catholic orphanage.
Yeah, fun times. As you would imagine, it's very punitive. And the girls are in this very strict environment and they thrive, believe it or not, after coming from the place where they were initially. But people start noticing things about Christine when she's there. She's described as rigid, intense, deeply religious, and also easily slighted, quick to anger, and suddenly remorse. Sounds like me with PMS. It's like they just describe the entire thing. It's almost like something would flip. Leah was very different. She was quiet, passive, and compliant, which on its own isn't pathology, as we know, but in the right environment, it becomes vulnerability. So now we fast forward to the 1920s. So Amelia decides she wants to become a nun, and the mother finds out about this and says, oh, hell no. So she pulls out the other daughters so that they can go start working as maids, because apparently she is able to take the money that they make as maids. So she basically puts them to work. Mother of the year. Mm-hmm. They end up in this household called the Lancelin family, or the household is of the Lancelin family. There's Renee Leone, who's the mother. Renee's the father. And the daughter is Genevieve. And Christine and Leah are hired there. They work together as live-in maids. And they remain in that household continuously for years. So from the outside, they're ideal servants. They're quiet, they're efficient, they never complain. But the thing is, they have no social life. They have no friends, no relationships. They rarely leave the house, and they speak to almost no one except each other. With the exception of, side note here, some accounts say that they go to a fortune teller. Like you do. And this fortune teller is telling them that they were a married couple in a previous life.
Oh.
Which will come back around later, because there is suspicion that they may have had an incestuous relationship. We'll get to that later. So at first they bond with this mom. Go figure. Finally, they have a stable mother figure. They start calling her Maman. And Leone actually cuts off the payments to the mother and says, you girls can have your own money. You're earning it here. So she's on their side for a while. But at one point, Leone goes into a depressive episode, and she isolates herself from the girls, and she becomes more punitive. I read that she would walk around the house with white gloves and kind of test for dust and, pinch and be aggressive towards the girls.
Pinch?
Pinch. I'm calling them girls. They're actually, at this point, Christine is 25 at this point, and Leah is 19. So they're young women now.
Right.
But eventually this rupture, along with the isolation, does something to them, because there's no one to reality check. There's no one to challenge your thinking, and the world is getting smaller and smaller. And now it's just these two people, right? Christine starts to change. She becomes more reactive, more suspicious, and there's reports of paranoid thinking. She's feeling criticized. She may have been criticized, actually. I mean, from all accounts, it sounds like the mother was getting a little bit meaner and distancing herself. So a lot of that probably wasn't imagined, but
the mother or Mama? Maman. Okay.
Leone, yes. And Leah doesn't question it. She absorbs all Christine's belief without questions, because she's her anchor. So now you have the one person who's becoming increasingly unstable, and the other person who's completely entwined with her and doesn't have much of a mind of her own, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So, on the fateful day of February 2nd, 1933, so Leone and Genevieve, who's her daughter, I believe she was 21 when they moved in, so I guess she's, mid-20s now. They go out shopping, and when they come back, the house is totally dark, because Christine has plugged in a faulty iron, which creates a short. And when Leone confronts them, something happens fast. Christine snaps. She lunges at Leone and immediately goes for her eyes. It's not random or defensive, it's targeted. And she starts screaming to Leah, "Gouge her eyes out." So Genevieve comes in, and now Leah is attacking Genevieve, gouging at her eyes. Christine runs downstairs, gets a hammer and a knife from the kitchen, and comes back out. And the two of them just go to town on these women, bludgeoning them. They totally bludgeon their thighs and their butts and literally gouge out their eyes. So then as quickly as it starts, it's done. It went on for 30 minutes, but then they just got tired, cleaned up, and went to bed.
30 minutes is a really long time.
It's a really long time to be bludgeoning butts. Yeah, and gouging eyes. So the police arrive. Some accounts say that A police officer sees a lone eyeball on the landing. Yeah.
Sorry, just choked on my wine.
Other accounts say that they found eyeballs in the folds of Leonie's scarves. In any event.
Were all the eyeballs gouged out?
Yes, eyeballs were all gone. Faces unrecognizable. A total massacre. And so the cops are afraid, oh my gosh, this is probably what happened to the maids. They probably happened to them too. They run upstairs and here they are, just laying naked in the bed together. And they just basically, with no feeling or emotion, just say, yeah, we did it. So they arrest them without incident. Just put your clothes on, weirdos, let's go. So they're not hiding, they're not panicking, they're just laying there. So psychiatrists are brought in early and a pattern emerges. So Christine is the one who is emotionally volatile, paranoid, and showing signs that, and this was kind of like just first becoming studied at the time and written about, that she was showing these severe psychological disturbances. And Leah is different. She's totally quiet when questioned, just basically parroting back everything that Christine is saying. So the distinction becomes the backbone of how the case is understood. The trial begins in September of 1933. And they are just basically a psychological case study. As the violence is described in court, the experts are arguing over motive, whether or not they're insane or if they're fit to stand trial. And eventually the jury says, regardless of all this evidence that shows that something was up, we still think they know what they were doing. And Christine is convicted and sentenced to the guillotine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that would be a terrible outcome. And it's later commuted to life imprisonment. Leah only gets 10-year sentence of hard labor because they can basically see that Christine was the brains of the operation. She gets out early because of the war, and she ends up going back to live with her biological mother and an aunt and working as a hotel maid.
I guess they don't do background checks.
No, that wasn't a thing back then, I guess.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Meanwhile, Christine, she's in prison and she deteriorates. Her mental state goes completely downhill as if it could go any worse. And they put her in a psychiatric institution where she dies. And some accounts say that she starved herself. And that's what I was going to tell you is that for a while there, she threatened to gouge her own eyes out if she wasn't allowed to see Leah, to the point where they had to put her in a straitjacket. And then the guards finally give in and allow them to see each other. And she reportedly runs towards Leah, unbuttoning her shirt, saying, please say yes, please say yes. So this is where the speculation came that they may have had an incestuous relationship. But at the end of the day, she ends up dying within a few years. I think it was within 4 years of being in the institution. And so there wasn't a lot to confirm that she starved herself to death, but just basically that she went downhill, stopped caring for herself. So people try to explain all this away. They say rage, abuse, a lot of news outlets at the time were talking about this being class resentment. And some people were actually sticking up for them, saying this is what happens in this classist society. But really, it doesn't explain how two people were acting as one, starting together, stopping together, and then lying in bed together as if nothing had happened. Because it wasn't just a breakdown, it was shared psychosis. Christine was the one who was the primary, or they call the inducer, where she has a breakdown in thinking, she starts having delusions and emotional instability. And then Leah is the suggested one who has no previous evidence. Actually, both of them had a family history. I'm kind of getting a little off topic, but thinking back, both of them had a family history. An uncle had committed suicide, and there was somebody else in the family that was mentally unstable. So there was a family background, but Leah herself had showed no evidence of any thought disturbance prior to this. So this is Folie à deux. One mind generates the belief, the other accepts it because the other person convinces them. And a lot of times we can see there's early trauma, family fracture, reunification with over-attachment, total isolation, a dominant personality, and a dependent one. So it's basically a closed system with no reality checking. So we are about to go into the woods and talk about the neurobiology of Folie à Deux, which we think is very interesting. Nerds. Hopefully you will also think it's interesting. So Folie à Deux in French means the madness of two, and it was formally described in 1877 by the French psychiatrist Charles Lasègue and Jules Faure. And the core idea is simple. A delusion originates in one person and is transmitted to the other. So you're not going to find this in the DSM. Do you know what the DSM is?
No.
Okay, so the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, it's used by mental health practitioners for diagnostic purposes. And this one is folded into delusional disorder or other specified psychotic disorder. But what's happening isn't just influence. So what they see in the inducer, or in Christine in this case, is a dopamine dysregulation. Dopamine's the neurotransmitter, the pleasure center.
Yup.
And the brain starts assigning importance to things that aren't actually meaningful. So a look, a tone, or a comment can feel like proof of a threat. Again, me with PMS. Why are you looking at me that way?
I will fucking kill you.
So at this time, the amygdala, which is the threat detection, becomes overactive. And the prefrontal cortex, which is logic and reality testing, becomes less effective. So basically, your brain's saying threat, threat, threat. And then the manager part of you that says, no, he didn't mean it that way is totally offline. And this is how a delusion happens. Now, the secondary person doesn't necessarily have to have any of these disturbances. They just have heightened suggestibility and emotional dependence, chronic stress, trauma history, and the most critical is isolation. So you don't have those external anchors. So you have the one person saying, we're in danger, we need to do something about it. And the secondary one basically prioritizes attachment over reality. So the fear of losing the attachment to the inducer is so much scarier than actually believing that, aliens are coming to get you.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Although it doesn't.
It doesn't make sense, but it does make sense. So it's considered rare. It's a very small percentage, I believe less than 1%. But over the last 150 years, there's dozens, and at the top number, a few hundred published case reports and case series. But a lot of people say it's just misdiagnosed because, as we see, usually when they're separated, it dissipates. It no longer continues. So there's something about them being together. But there's been other documented variations. Folie à trois, which is 3 people, and folie à famille. When you hear your family. I don't know why I'm saying that, but
Olive Garden. There's
always isolation, power imbalance, and a dominant figure. And one of the family ones was really interesting. It's this Barari in India. This was in July 2018. There's 11 members of the Bhatia family, or Bhatia, were found dead in their home. 10 of them were hanging blindfolded with their hands tied, arranged in a formation that investigators said resembled ritual. So there's the 11th was found dead in another room. So at the first, it looked like a mass suicide, but then they found a journal that had been written by one of the daughters, but she was saying what her father had been telling her. And after the grandfather died, the father started believing that he was contacting him from the dead and telling him that they had to come be with him. So basically, the family didn't question it. They just followed it. They started with one man's belief system, and now the entire family is participating. So it was a shared delusional system. They were totally isolated where they were, and they just bought into the father. And if we use that same neurobiology we're talking about, he's having this disrupted brain connection, and the family is just at his
falling
whim.
In line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess if they lost the one patriarch of the family, the grandfather, now they got to believe the father. So they all hung themselves. So when you step back and look at all these, a pattern starts to emerge. It's how easily belief spreads when there's no one left to challenge it. And that brings us to the case that we talked about in the very beginning of the episode. And that was in England in 2008. We were talking about Sabina and Ursula Eriksson, identical twins, originally from Sweden. So Sabina she had been living in the United States, and she had a husband, she had kids, very stable, ordinary life, no sign of mental illness. That is documented. I mean, maybe the husband would say differently. Yeah, for all we know, but there was nothing documented. She goes to visit her sister, and things go sideways pretty quickly. On May 16th of 2008, they hop on a bus to go to Liverpool. And while they're on the bus, they start acting really suspicious, clutching at their bags, making paranoid comments, so much so that the bus driver pulls over this non-bus stop and basically says, I need to see what's in your bags. The girls refuse, women refuse, so they're not allowed back on the bus. So now they're in the middle of the M6 highway, and their behavior is so erratic that they call some cops. And as it happens, the entire interaction was captured by the BBC documentary Motorway Cops. So basically, like the cops in the US, they had a motorway, which is highway. Cops come out, and they get this whole thing on video. So we're going to put the link for you. So when the officers emerge, the women are highly agitated and paranoid. At one point, Sabina yells, "They're going to steal your organs." So they know something's amiss. And without warning, Ursula Eriksson runs into traffic, and she's immediately decimated by a semi-truck going 60 or 70 miles, just disappears under its wheels, and it turns out both her legs are broken. So the officer...
it turns out?
It turns out, shockingly enough. Then, almost immediately afterwards, Sabina does the exact same thing, and she's hit by a car. But her injuries aren't as bad. But they both survive, and they both start fighting the officers, telling them again, we know you're not real, we know you're trying to steal our organs. They bring both of them to the hospital. Ursula obviously has to stay a minute because her legs are broken. And Sabina, she, oddly enough, becomes calm and oriented and coherent enough that they release her from the hospital the same day. Which is very difficult to understand, considering that she had just ran into traffic.
Do you think neither one of them were obliterated because perhaps adrenaline?
I know. I was thinking that same thing. I was thinking they must have, when they showed up, been like, they're on drugs. And then they must have tested them for drugs, Because I've heard of people being on drugs in their system. They can jump off buildings and survive.
Right.
But they were not on drugs. They were having a folie
deux.
So they basically send Sabina out into this town where she has no idea where she is. Her shit's in a bag. She's just walking around disoriented. And she comes across this man, Glenn Hollinshead, who was formerly in the military, and he was a former EMT as well. He was 54 years old. This nice, kind soul, which of course I think is suspicious.
I'm like, I see where this is going.
Offers to take her in and give her help, food, shelter, and basic assistance. And she accepts. So he and a friend are hanging out that night, and the friend attests to the fact that she starts acting really weird. Like they light cigarettes and she snatches them away and says, they might be poison. Don't have them.
Well, they are.
Well, yeah, besides that. The next day, Glenn walks outside to talk to his neighbor, and when he comes back into the house, Sabina, just out of nowhere, supposedly, she stabs him multiple times with a knife. He staggers outside saying, she stabbed me, and ultimately dies. So she runs from the scene, and she somehow gets caught on a 40-foot bridge above a highway, jumps off, and again lives. So she ends up being sentenced to, I believe, 5 years in prison.
That's it?
Yeah, for manslaughter under the diminished responsibility that she was having a psychotic episode. So meanwhile, Ursula recovers physically, and neither of them have any continuation that's documented of psychotic behavior.
Horseshit.
Yeah, I know. So how does this fit into Folie à Deux? Because on the surface, it just looks chaotic and all over the place. But structurally, it mirrors the pattern. There's an extremely close bond between identical twins. Oh, Rocky's up.
Look at that cute booty.
Aw. Hey, Rock. There's a sudden emergence of a shared paranoid belief. They thought someone was going to steal their organs. There's synchronized behavior at the exact same moment or within a few moments running into traffic. And then the critical divergence after separation. Everything's hunky-dory. So let's see. So we've seen this in 1933 France and 2008 England. Two completely different worlds, same psychological structure, which raises a bigger question. If belief shared this intensely in extreme cases like this, what does this look like in everyday life? So what we want to talk about here is that even though these psychotic episodes are far-fetched, this pattern shows up often in everyday life. When you're isolated, if you're maybe in an abusive relationship and someone is telling you things about yourself or about the world that you might tend to believe, because not believing them and diverging from the one person who's become your anchor feels so much more scary than actually disputing the belief that maybe no one likes you or you're not good enough. So people can adopt delusions all the time.
Like as a survival mode.
Yeah. So how about this? How about, Liz, you tell me about a time when you adopted a delusion. That may or may not have been accurate.
A delusion.
Yeah.
I don't think I have any of those.
I know you do. Because there's no way that you would have believed that a man was going to come down your chimney.
That's right.
Right?
That is a delusion.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So
Everyone buys into that.
right. So Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I believed in Santa Claus, and I'll tell you why. Because my mom said, as we were kids growing up, you start to hear things as you get older, and you get
mutterings.
right. You get to a certain age. And, the dickhead kids at school are like, Santa Claus isn't real. Santa Claus isn't real. So, like, my sister and I would go home and be like, Mom, we heard that Santa isn't real. And she said, well, when you stop believing, he stops coming. So I think when Santa stopped coming, I was probably like 36.
So you believed that delusion for a long time.
No, but not quite 36. But truthfully, I was well into my teenage years before I finally had to give up the ghost.
Yeah. You had to get, and the fear that you might not get those gifts kept you believing this.
Santa in our house was, oh man.
That's a folie famille, right?
For me, yeah.
Yeah, which everyone has. Mine is...
That's an Emily Crowellism right there.
Mine is I had a friend, the song by AC/DC, Dirty Deeds.
Of course. That's the best band that ever lived.
Evidently, they don't say Dirty Deeds and the Thunder Chief, like my friend had led me to believe. Because one day I challenged it with another friend who said they were saying Dirty Deeds and the clock struck 3. So we looked it up, and it turns out we'd both been having separate folie à deux moments, believing different song lyrics, because that's kind of a delusion. I'm really stretching here. So strangers, we want to hear yours too. Drop it in the comments. Something you were absolutely sure of until you weren't. Because there's a line between that's impossible and I used to think that too. Mm-hmm. That line is thinner than you think.
Absolutely.
If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show, leave a review, share it with someone who likes the weird corners of the mind, and we will see you next time on Strange Mind.
Peace out, strangers.